In the quiet town of Whispering Pines, there was an old, dusty furniture store that everyone seemed to avoid. The centerpiece of the store was a massive, ominous-looking sofa, covered in dark, velvet fabric, with intricate patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking. One day, a young couple named Lily and Mark, newly married and searching for furniture, stumbled upon the store. The eccentric shopkeeper, a frail man with a crooked smile, insisted they take the sofa, offering it at an unbelievable price. Mark felt uneasy, but Lily, captivated by its strange charm, convinced him to buy it. They loaded the heavy piece into their truck, not noticing the shopkeeper's eerie grin as they drove away. The first night with the sofa was uneventful, but as the week went on, strange things began to happen. Lily swore she heard faint whispers when she sat on it, and their cat, Whiskers, refused to go near it, hissing whenever it was in sight. Mark laughed off her concerns, joking that they had bought a haunted couch. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening, as they relaxed in the living room, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped suddenly. They both felt a heavy presence in the room, as if someone or something was watching them. Lily tried to stand, but the sofa seemed to grip her, its fabric tightening around her like a vice. Mark rushed to help, but he too felt an invisible force holding him back. They struggled, panic rising, until suddenly the room went dark. When the lights came back on, they found themselves sitting on the floor, the sofa looking as innocent as ever. Shaken, they decided to sleep in the bedroom, leaving the sofa alone. But that night, Lily had a nightmare of being swallowed whole by the couch, its cushions turning into a gaping mouth. She woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, and Mark, pale and trembling, admitted he had the same dream. They agreed to get rid of the sofa the next day, but when they tried to move it, they found it impossibly heavy, as if it had rooted itself to the floor. No matter how hard they tried, the sofa wouldn't budge. Frustrated and frightened, they called a friend, Tom, to help. Tom arrived, laughed at their fears, and confidently tried to lift the couch. As soon as Tom touched it, the sofa seemed to shudder, and he was thrown back across the room with a force that left him unconscious. Lily and Mark screamed for help, but the house seemed to be in a bubble, isolating them from the outside world. Terrified, they realized they were trapped with the malevolent piece of furniture. As night fell, they huddled together, too scared to sleep, every creak of the house sending them into a frenzy of fear. The sofa, now appearing more sinister than ever, seemed to breathe, its cushions rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Whispered voices filled the room, and Lily swore she saw shadowy figures moving just out of sight. In their desperation, they considered burning the couch, but the thought of setting their home on fire stopped them. They decided to wait until morning, hoping daylight would bring some clarity. But as the hours dragged on, the sense of dread only grew stronger. Mark, trying to stay calm, suggested they leave the house and never return. They rushed to the front door, but it wouldn't open, as if sealed shut by an invisible force. The windows were the same, and their phones had no signal. Lily, on the verge of tears, suggested they pray, but even that seemed futile in the face of such evil. The night stretched on, with every minute feeling like an eternity. At dawn, the house finally released them, the door swinging open on its own. They fled, leaving everything behind, never to return. But as they drove away, exhausted and terrified, they didn't notice the small, dark stain on the back seat of their car. The sofa, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. Lily and Mark checked into a hotel, desperate for some sleep after the nightmare they had just escaped. The room was small but clean, with a plain bed, a TV and, to their dismay, a small love seat in the corner. Lily laughed nervously, suggesting they sleep in the car instead. But Mark convinced her that the hotel sofa was just an ordinary piece of furniture. They tried to relax, but both were too on edge to sleep, every creak of the room sending chills down their spines. They finally drifted off, only to be awakened by the sound of scratching. Mark turned on the light to find nothing amiss, but the noise persisted, as if coming from within the walls. They checked the walls, the floor and even under the bed, but found nothing. Mark, trying to be brave, joked that maybe it was the ghost of the sofa following them. But his forced laughter did little to ease their fears. They decided to stay awake, watching TV to distract themselves. But every channel they flipped to was static. The scratching grew louder, and the room seemed to grow colder by the minute. Lily noticed that the love seat in the corner had moved slightly, though she hadn't seen it happen. She pointed it out to Mark, who dismissed it as a trick of the light. But both kept glancing at it, unable to shake the feeling that it was somehow watching them. Suddenly, the TV flickered, and for a brief moment, the screen showed an image of their living room back home, with the cursed sofa in full view. They stared in horror, unable to comprehend how it was possible. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the static once more. Mark suggested they leave, but as they grabbed their things, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. They fumbled for the door, but it too was stuck, just like at their house. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped again, this time in a strange hotel room with no escape. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by faint, mocking laughter. The love seat in the corner seemed to loom larger, its cushions bulging as if something inside was trying to break free. In desperation, Mark grabbed a lamp and smashed it against the door, hoping to break it down. The door didn't budge, but the mirror beside it shattered, revealing a dark, swirling void behind it. The void seemed to pull at them, drawing them closer despite their attempts to resist. Lily screamed as she felt herself being dragged towards the broken mirror. But Mark held on to her, trying to pull her back. The love seat in the corner suddenly jerked forward, moving on its own as if possessed. Mark and Lily watched in terror as it slid across the floor towards them, its fabric twisting and writhing like a living thing. With a final burst of strength, Mark threw himself and Lily against the door, and it finally gave way, spilling them out into the hallway. They scrambled to their feet and ran, not looking back as they fled the hotel. They drove all night, putting as much distance between them and the cursed furniture as possible. When they finally stopped, it was at a small diner in the middle of nowhere, where they sat in silence, too shaken to speak. Lily broke down in tears, confessing that she felt they were cursed, that the sofa would never stop until it claimed them. Mark tried to comfort her, but he too was beginning to believe they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. As they sipped their coffee, a waitress approached their table with a smile. "I heard you folks are looking for a new place to stay," she said cheerfully. They exchanged a wary glance before nodding. The waitress handed them a card with the address of a nearby bed and breakfast, insisting it was the best in town. Desperate and exhausted, they decided to take her advice. They thanked her and left, hoping this time they would find peace. But as they walked out to their car, Lily noticed something odd. The back seat, where the small, dark stain had been, now had a faint, almost imperceptible outline of a cushion. She shivered, trying to dismiss it as a trick of her tired mind. But deep down, she knew the truth. The sofa was still with them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next move. The bed and breakfast was charming with a warm, welcoming atmosphere that put Lily and Mark at ease. The elderly couple who owned it, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, were kind and hospitable, making them feel like family. Their room was cozy, with a large, comfortable bed, antique furniture, and a fireplace that crackled softly in the corner. For the first time in days, they felt a glimmer of hope that their nightmare might finally be over. They spent the evening chatting with the Jenkinses, who shared stories of the town's history and offered them homemade apple pie. It was a pleasant distraction from the horrors they had faced, and for a while, they almost forgot about the cursed sofa. But that night, as they lay in bed, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped, and a cold draft swept through, extinguishing the fire. Mark got up to investigate, but found nothing unusual, just a chill in the air that seemed out of place. Lily, sensing something was wrong, suggested they leave, but Mark insisted they were just being paranoid. They tried to sleep, but strange noises filled the room, creaks, groans, and the faint sound of something dragging across the floor. They sat up, their hearts pounding, as the noises grew louder. The fireplace, once warm and inviting, now seemed to radiate an icy coldness, as if something was trying to claw its way out. Suddenly, the antique wardrobe in the corner creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Mark approached it cautiously, but before he could close the door, the bed shook violently, throwing them both to the floor. They scrambled to their feet, only to find the wardrobe empty, save for a single, tattered cushion on the floor. Lily gasped in horror as she recognized it. It was identical to the cushions on the cursed sofa. The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. The sofa had somehow followed them here, its malevolent presence now infecting this place as well. They grabbed their belongings and ran, not even bothering to explain to the Jenkinses as they fled into the night. They drove aimlessly for hours, unsure of where to go or what to do. The sense of dread hung over them like a dark cloud, and every time they looked in the rearview mirror, they half expected to see the sofa looming behind them. Eventually, they ended up at an old church on the outskirts of town, its stained glass windows glowing softly in the moonlight. Desperate and terrified, they decided to seek refuge there, hoping that the sanctity of the place would protect them. The priest, Father Donovan, welcomed them in without question, offering them a place to stay in the church's small guest room. He listened patiently as they recounted their story, his expression grave as he took in their tale of the cursed sofa. Father Donovan believed they were dealing with something far more dangerous than a mere haunted object. He suspected the sofa was a vessel for an ancient, malevolent spirit, one that had latched onto them and was now feeding off their fear. He offered to perform a cleansing ritual, one that would banish the spirit and hopefully free them from its grasp. Exhausted and with no other options, Lily and Mark agreed, placing their trust in the priest. The ritual began at midnight, with Father Donovan chanting ancient prayers and burning incense around the room. The atmosphere grew tense as the air seemed to thicken, and the temperature dropped once more. As the ritual reached its climax, the room was filled with an ear-piercing scream, followed by a violent gust of wind that knocked them all to the ground. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the shadow of the cursed sofa appeared on the wall, its outline menacing and twisted. Father Donovan shouted one final incantation, and the shadow dissipated, leaving the room in an eerie silence. Mark and Lily, trembling and exhausted, felt a sense of relief wash over them as they realized the ritual had worked. The priest, though shaken, assured them that the spirit had been banished and they were safe now. They thanked him profusely, feeling for the first time that they might finally be free of the nightmare. They spent the night in the church, and for the first time in days, they slept soundly, free from the fear that had plagued them. When they awoke the next morning, they felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. They decided to start fresh, leaving the town behind and heading for a new life elsewhere. As they drove away, the morning sun shining down on them, they allowed themselves to hope that the worst was truly behind them. But as they pulled onto the highway, neither noticed the faint, dark outline of a cushion that had appeared on the back seat once more. Lily and Mark settled in a small, quiet town far from where their nightmare began. They bought a modest house with no furniture from their past, determined to leave all memories of the cursed sofa behind. For a while, life returned to normal. They found new jobs, made friends, and began to rebuild their lives, slowly pushing the horrors of the past to the back of their minds. But every now and then, Lily would wake up in the middle of the night, certain she had heard the faint sound of whispering. Mark, too, felt a lingering unease, though he tried to dismiss it as paranoia. One evening, they decided to have a few friends over for dinner, hoping to bring some warmth and joy into their new home. The evening was a success, with laughter and good food, but as the night wore on, a familiar coldness began to creep into the room. Lily noticed it first, a slight chill in the air that made her shiver. She glanced at Mark, who gave her a reassuring smile, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Their friends didn't seem to notice anything unusual, continuing to chat and enjoy themselves. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the evening wound down and their friends left, Lily and Mark sat in the living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. They had hoped to escape the curse, but it seemed that it had followed them even here. The next day, Lily went out to run errands while Mark stayed home to finish some work. As he sat at his desk, he heard a soft thump coming from the living room. He dismissed it as nothing, but the noise persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Mark finally got up to investigate, his heart pounding in his chest. When he entered the living room, he froze in terror. The sofa they had bought for their new home was gone, replaced by the cursed sofa they had left behind. It sat there, dark and ominous, its cushions slightly indented as if someone had just been sitting on it. Mark backed away slowly, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. He heard the front door open and Lily's voice calling out, but he couldn't move, his eyes locked on the sofa. When Lily entered the room, she gasped, her face paling as she saw the horrific sight before them. The realization hit them both at the same time. They would never be free of the cursed sofa. It had latched onto them, becoming a part of their lives, a permanent fixture in their existence. Despair washed over them as they sat down on the floor, too stunned to do anything else. The sofa, it seemed, was their fate, an inescapable presence that would haunt them for the rest of their days. As night fell, the house grew cold, and the whispering began again, louder this time, almost as if the sofa was mocking them. They huddled together, tears streaming down their faces as they realized there was no escape. The sofa's presence grew stronger, the air thick with a malevolent force that pressed down on them, suffocating them with fear and sadness. They could feel their will to fight slipping away, replaced by a deep, overwhelming despair. In the end, they realized there was only one way out. They couldn't live like this, with the cursed sofa haunting their every moment, feeding on their fear and sorrow. They decided to end it together, Finding solace in the thought that at least they wouldn't face the horror alone, they held hands, whispering words of love and comfort to each other as they prepared to take the final step. As they closed their eyes, the sofa's whispers grew louder, almost as if it were laughing at them, reveling in their despair. But in their final moments, they found peace in each other's arms, knowing that they would be free of the cursed sofa at last. And as the night turned to dawn, the house fell silent, the cursed sofa sitting alone in the darkness, waiting patiently for its next victims.